generating and does not burn up, is concerned with his people here and his people here. The second great lesson. My brother, I have an older brother, he's 12 years older than I am, and he was in Vietnam for about a year and a half in the mid-60s. And as you can imagine, that experience changed him permanently. He was not the same person who came back when that went. And that, in fact, is a sad thing. But I remember one day that I was visiting him, actually a weekend that I was visiting him, and two of the people that were in his unit in Vietnam literally happened to come by and visit. And he invited them in, and I was sitting with my brother and the two guys, and frankly I don't remember their names, but the four of us were sitting back in his den, and even though my brother and I had known each other all my life, and he was one of those people, when I was younger, my big brother was my big brother. I don't know if you have an older brother, but if you do, I hope that you felt about your older brother, or you feel about your older brother the way I did when I was 5 and 6 and 7 years old. My older brother was the greatest person in my life. I love my older brother. We did stuff together. We were close, but as we talked, as I sat there and listened to these three men talk about their experiences in Vietnam, I understood that I was not part of the conversation because they had shared something that I never could. And in the sharing of that awful struggle, there was a bond between them that was unlike any other. And without denigrating his family or meaning to be insulting to anyone, my brother, in fact, admitted that he felt closer to the people that he served in Vietnam with than he did just about anyone else in his life. And I thought about that this week as I read this text and realized that the God who has compassion on us is the God who steps down from heaven, as the text says, to intercede on our behalf. That we need to understand that in the Old Testament here and in the New Testament later, we don't have a God. We have a God who is holy and other, but we also have a God who became one of us and lived among us and struggles with us and bonds with us because we have shared experience. The God who has compassion on us shares our humanity with us in order to be closer to us than he otherwise could be. And understand that this too relates to the supper. That later when we take the bread and take the cup, we're going to remember the God who stepped down from heaven, became clothed with humanity, suffered with us, and because of us, cleansed us, and then stepped back up to his rightful place. But when the Scriptures tell us that God has compassion on us, he does not say, I have compassion from a distance. He says, I have compassion on my people, and I have come down to where they are to rescue them. God is God, and we are not. And God has compassion on us. And the third lesson that we learn from the text today, and again, this is almost one of those plays on word, but did you understand that when Moses first, in his ignorance, comes to God and says, God, here I am, and God says, no, wait, we have to do some teaching. After they've interacted, after Moses has experienced God, he says to God, who am I to do what you would ask me to do? You see, every time that we encounter God, whether it's in the Old Testament then, or in the New Testament later, or in Petaluma today, whenever we genuinely experience the presence of God in our life, we're forced to ask the question, who am I? Because it is God that gives us our identity. And I'm sure you've heard those sermons and heard those Bible studies, and in fact, in the next few weeks, we're going to look at Moses, like most of us, when given the chance to serve God, does what? Does he say, thank you for picking me? Oh boy, I'm ready to go. No, like most of us, he goes, you know what? I think you made a bad choice. And most of us think that when we read this, we think that Moses is saying, I don't want to do this. But I think at first blush, he's really saying, God, being in your presence has changed me. I used to think that I'm God, but I see now that you are. Well, who am I? Well, who am I? And God says to us, who are you? You are the person that I am going to be with when you do what I ask you to do. Moses, I know you've heard me say this, but understand that Moses is the preeminent, Moses is the most important person in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, at the Transfiguration, when Jesus is glorified, there are two people that appear with him, and one of them is Moses. And in that moment, he is representing the law. Moses is a big deal. Moses is a big deal. There's no one else like him, ever. But understand that this big deal, that this person that has a preeminent position in the Old Testament, unlike any other, this person that we make movies about and write books about, was a murderer. He was actually a felon fleeing the scene. And after being in Midian for 40 years, I love this one, he was working for his father-in-law. In most cases, and I'm not saying in every case, in most cases, if you're working for your father-in-law, it's because you were so lame you couldn't get a job on your own, and he was afraid his daughter would starve if it was left up to you. Can you imagine what it would have been like for Moses if some of the people that were in Prince of Egypt school with him growing up had come by the Midian? Moses, when you were in Egypt, you were the best and the brightest of all of us. You were raised in the royal house as one of Pharaoh's grandchildren. What have you been up to? Well, I work for my father-in-law now. I'm a shepherd. In Egypt, at the time of Moses, guess what the job with the least amount of prestige there was? Shepherd. I can't even think of a good analogy today for what a shepherd would have been back then, but if you were an Egyptian and I told you, I'm a shepherd, you would have thought, loser. And yet this is the man that God is going to send to Pharaoh. And it's going to work. Not because Moses is so great, because Moses is the person that God will be with when you go before Pharaoh. Oh yeah, if you're sitting there thinking, back in my prime, I'm all over this God thing. But it's someone else's turn now. You know how old Moses is on this day? Roughly 80. Roughly 80.
Or 90.
80 or 90. Not 17. Not 20. Or 30. But getting up there. Who am I? I'm going to go before the most powerful ruler on the planet and tell him, destroy the economy of your nation and let us go. And he's going to agree to that? Who am I? And God says, you are the person that I am with. And it's going to work. Because I say so. And he says that to us today. Who are we? We are the people that God is with. And if we focus on him, if we understand that he is God and we're not, if we let him have compassion on us, if we understand that when we go in his power and not our own, his purposes will be accomplished in this place.